Let's look at this question. Each of the five friends named Michelle, Luke, Nikki, William, and Sophia own exactly one distinct company from among the five companies named PQRST, not necessarily in that particular order. Okay. So five friends, five companies. The revenues of the five companies generated in a particular quarter is rupees 50 million, 45 million, 40 million, 35 million, and 30 million, not necessarily in that order. So it is basically an AP of five, starting with 30, ending at 50. Okay. All differing by 5 is given. Okay. Next, additional information given. Nikki does not own S and blah and blah. Now, the default reaction here, as is the case with most workings, would be to create a table, name and company and revenue. Name and company and revenue. And let's make that 5 people, 5 companies, 5 revenue numbers. At least this was my default reaction. Nikki does not own S, cannot record it. The revenue generated by P is greater than the revenue generated by company owned by Nikki by rupees 5 million. So let's say P in company operated by Nikki, their revenue, if the revenue here is, let's say, here if it is X, this is X plus 5. The revenue generated by P is greater than the revenue generated by the company owned by Nikki by rupees 5 million. Next, the revenue generated by company owned by Michelle is greater than the revenue generated by Q by rupees 10 million. Now the challenge is P the company owned by Michelle, or is Q the company owned by Nikki? That cannot be asserted. So we'll write it separately, but it could very well be the same thing. So the revenue generated by company owned by Michelle is Y plus 10, and the company Q is Y. Revenue for company Q is Y. Next, the revenue generated by company owned by William is greater than the revenue generated by R by rupees 10 million. Very similar to Michelle and Q that we had. We also have for William, and how much is it? R. So R, if this is Z, this is Z plus 10. And we need more rows and columns and everything. Next is Luke does not own T. Cool. Luke does not own T, can't really record it. This statement and this statement are identical. We'll worry about them later. Next, the revenue generated by S is greater than the revenue generated by company owned by Sophia by rupees 5 million. Revenue generated by S is greater than the revenue generated by Sophia by 5 million. So if this is W plus 5. And this is the entire storyline that we have currently. This is the entire storyline that we have currently. Okay. While working with all this, the challenge is we had only 5 people, yet we have ended up with 8 rows. And this does not even guarantee that all 8, within these 8 rows, you have all the 5 people mentioned. Maybe Q goes to Nikki, P goes to Michelle, R goes to Sophia, S goes to William. Some sort of arrangement of that nature can also be created. And therefore, this default representation wouldn't work for this question. In fact, this is also given here. If Michelle owns R, then which of the following can be true? Then you have if William owns the company having a revenue of rupees 50 million. So then which company owned by Michelle? Which company is owned by Michelle? Which of the following companies is owned by Luke? And what is the revenue generated for the company owned by Luke? Right now, for the 2 questions associated with Luke, can you see your precise options? And the other 2, you have cases mentioned, which is to say you won't really end up with a precise table. You will have some sort of cases getting created. And the other thing you can notice for this set is instruction 2 instruction 2, instruction 3, instruction 4, and instruction 6. All four of these instructions. All four of these instructions are very similar, as in something is greater than something. So what I'm doing is, I'm going to write down names of these people. Nikki, Michelle, William, and Sophia. And let the individual revenue numbers for these five companies be denoted by these five variables only. P has revenue of P, Q has revenue of Q, R has revenue of R, S has revenue of S, T has revenue of T. How that will help me is, Nikki has a revenue of P minus 5. Nikki has a revenue of P minus 5. Okay. Michelle has a revenue of how much? Q plus 10. Q plus 10. Okay. William has a revenue of R plus 10. And Sophia has a revenue of S minus 5. Now, the only person not mentioned in this list is Luke. So, for Luke, see, P, Q, R, S. No, the revenue of all the five companies together is going to be P plus Q plus R plus S plus T. So, for Luke, if I need the summation of these five terms, revenue for each of these five people, to be equal to P plus Q plus R plus S plus T, I would need T for Luke and minus 5, minus 5. I'd also need minus 10. The revenue for Luke's company, the revenue for Luke's company has to be P minus 10. Now, if you look at the summation of these five companies, you would see summation turns out to be P plus Q plus R plus S plus T, which is the revenue generated by these five people, these five friends as well. Now, these representations are what give us clues. Look at P, Q, R, S, T. And the amounts of revenue generated is 30, 40, sorry, not 30, 40. There is a 35 in between as well. 35, 40, 45, and 50. Okay, wonderful thing. See, these five numbers have to be mapped to these five companies. These five numbers have to be mapped to these five companies. Can you see that the smallest, look at the largest number and the smallest number. That is where our world will reside. That is where we get the beautiful, most beautiful insights. 30. Where can 30 be created? If can you see? How do I? See the large for Q, the range of values that Q can take, Q plus 10 has to be greater than equal to has to be greater than equal to 30. But then the problem here would be, what would happen here, people? What would happen? This would mean Q has to be greater than equal to 20. We already know Q is greater than equal to 30. So can I say, Q plus 10? Q plus 10. Minimum value. Q can potentially only take values from among the first three, 30 to 40. Q can only take values among 30, 35, or 40. These are the only three values that Q can take. Similarly, R can only take values among 30, 35, or 40. Okay. P, the values that P can take are 50, 45, 40, and 35. S, in the same vein, can take 50, 45, 40, and 35. And T can take values 40, 45, and 50. These can be the values that are obtained by T. Okay. Now see, um, in a deeper insight on the base level, these numbers are there. Why am I erasing? These numbers are there. But on a better level, can you see between 30 and 50? Between 30 and 50. Can you see? Can out of these, can T be 50? Or can Luke have a revenue of 50? If Luke has a revenue of 50, if Luke has a revenue of 50, Luke will have or T will have a revenue of 60. In I now I know how to represent it better. I will get it. I will get rid of these numbers here. EQRST. Notice 50 has to be allocated to one of these five people, Nikki or Michelle or William or Sophia or Luke. Can Luke have a revenue of 50? No, because then it would mean T has a revenue of 60, which is not available. Can Sophia have a revenue of 50? No. If Sophia has a revenue of 50, that would mean S has a revenue of 55, which is not possible. Similarly, Nikki cannot have a revenue of 50. So either Michelle or William have a revenue of 50. Either Michelle or William have a revenue of 50, which would mean 40. Either Michelle or William have a revenue of 50, which means 40 is either Q or R. Q plus 10 is 50 or R plus 10 is 50. This is done for the largest value. Now for the smallest value. Now for the smallest value, can you see? How do I break it down? One of these is 50. One of these is 50. Now, again, okay. Now I think I should use it here. Can T take on the value of 30? Can T take on the value of 30? If T takes on the value of 30, Luke will have revenue as 20, which is impossible. Can S take on the value of 30? No, then Sophia will have revenue of less than 30. Can P take on the value of 30? No, then Nikki will have value less than of 30, which is impossible. Which is to say, P, S, and T cannot be, P, S, and T cannot be 30. Just as Luke's revenue, Sophia's revenues, and Nikki's revenue cannot be 50. If P, S, and T cannot be 30, can I say 30 also has to be given to one of Q or R, one of Q or R, which is to say between Q and R, 30 or 40, these two numbers will get distributed. Between Q and R, 30 or 40 will get distributed. Okay, this is wonderful. Now we know, in fact, I should go ahead and write it here. P, S, and T. P, S, and T. These three have to be here. Let me put 30 here and 40 here and 40 here and 30 here. Okay. Now T minus 10 I need. T minus 10 I should be able to do. So can T be 50? If T is 50, these three have to be how much? 35, 45, and 50. Okay. Now, let's see if T is 35. If T is 35, if T is 35, then revenue for Luke will turn out to be 25. So T cannot be 35. I can eliminate that. T has to be 45 or 50. T has to be 45 or 50. But even with this, see if T ends up taking the value of 50, if T ends up taking the value of 50, the problem will be, remember, one of Michelle or William were supposed to have a revenue of 50. One of Michelle or William were supposed to have a revenue of 50. If T ends up taking a value of 50, one of Michelle or William, see, okay, Q and R are supposed to take on value of 30 or 40. Q and R are supposed to take on a value of 30 or 40. So one of the revenues here for Michelle and William is going to be 40 and the other one is going to be 50. It could be 50, it could be 40 in any order. But that is certain 40 is getting used up there. If T takes on a value of 50, then Luke will also have a revenue of 40, which is impossible. Luke cannot have a revenue of 40, which is to say, this is now pretty much guaranteed. T will necessarily be 45. Okay. Now the two values left are 35 and 50. So I'll arrange it separately. 35, 50, 50, 35, 50, 35, and 40, 40, 40, 30, 45, 45. These are all the possible combinations that I can potentially have for the revenues of the four companies. And this enables me to get to revenue for these individual people as well. Let me do P minus 5. For Nikki, it will be 45, 45, 30, and 30. This case. Then for Michelle, it is Q plus 10. So 40, 50, and 40, 50, 40, and 50. Then for S, not for S, R plus 10. So I start off with 50, 40, 50, and 40. Then for Sophia, it is S minus 5. So 30, 30, 30, 30, 45, 45. And for Luke, it is always 35. Let me also go ahead and assign the company that these people have. This is T, 45 in the first column is T, 50 in the first column is P, Michelle has R, Sophia has Q, and 35 is with S. Luke has S. In the second column, 45 is with T. In fact, wherever I see 45, let me write down T. And then 50 in the second column, 50 is with P, 40 is with Q, Sophia has, sorry, not 30 is with R, and 35 is with S. Okay. The next column, the 35s are with P, 45s are with T, first 50 is with S, second 50 is also with S. So this is S, this is S. First 40 is with R, second 40 is with Q, and the first 30 is with Q, and the second 30 is with R. So the four cases for combinations are Nikki, Michelle, William, Sophia can have any of these revenue and company combos. We have 4 of them identified, and this requires a lot of processing, lot of working. I will try to recapture everything once. First, we write down all of this in terms of revenue of companies. Revenue of company minus 5 or plus 10, depending upon whatever is given to us. Oh, there is one more check that I have to do. The 2 instructions that Nikki does not own S. I have no case where Nikki has S. Luke does not own T. Luke, there is no case where Luke has T, so it is fine. First, I write down the names of the people, then everything in terms of minus 5 plus 10 plus 5, whatever it is, you write it down. Then you have 5 numbers. You have 5 numbers which are the revenues of the company. You have to give it out to PQRSTU, PQRST. Here you see that T or S or P cannot be 50. For 50, T or S or P cannot be that. Or no, sorry. What am I saying? T or S or P, T or S or P cannot be 30. Because if T or S or P are 30, then the revenue generated by either Nikki or Sophie or Luke would be less than 30, which is impossible. So T or S and P cannot be 30. So 30 has to be either Q or R. T or S has to be either Q or R. Done. Next, Luke cannot have a revenue of uh, 50. If Luke has a revenue of 50, that would mean T has a revenue of 60. Or Sophia cannot have a revenue of 50 because that would mean S has a revenue of 55. Nikki cannot have a revenue of 50 because that would mean P has a revenue of 55. So P minus 5, S minus 5, and T minus 10, they cannot be 50, which would mean either Q plus 10 is 50 or R plus 10 is 50. If Q plus 10 is 50 or R plus 10 is 50, it means 40 has to be either Q or R are the two variables that can assume the value of 40. So we start off with either Q is 30 and R is 40, or R is 30 and Q is 40. That is where our initial case making happens. Next thing we look at is, see, if Q or R can only take on values of 30 or 40, one of these is going to be 40, the other one is going to be 50. These two things are going to happen. Now, with that in mind, T minus 10. T cannot be 35. The three values that are left are 35, 45, and 50. T cannot be 35 because that would mean Luke has a revenue of 25. That would mean Luke has a revenue of 25. That is impossible. And T also cannot be 50. T also cannot be 45. It can be 40 and 50. T cannot be 50. T cannot be 50 because if T is 50, then Luke would have a revenue of 40, and we know revenue of 40 is going to be distributed between Michelle and Williams. So T cannot be 50 either. So T cannot be 35. T cannot be 50. The only possible case that T can take is 45. So we have distributed that. Then we are left with 35 and 50 are the two possible numbers that S and P can take. We write it down. Then, basis these numbers, we go back. Depending upon the variable construction that we have here, we have made the 4 cases. And now we can get to the individual questions. If Michelle owns R, so we are looking at case 1 and case 3. If Michelle owns R, which of the following can be true? Okay, not is true, can be true. First, Williams owns P. The first case itself, I see. And the revenue generated by P is 50 million. Yes, this can be true, but we can't mark this as the answer because we have all of the above given as well. Next, the revenue generated by the company owned by Luke is rupees 35 million. Yes, that is true in either case. The revenue generated by the company owned by Sophia is rupees 30 million. Sophia, 30 million in the first case we have. Yes, this is also true. So the answer has to be all of the above. Next, what is the revenue generated by the company owned by Luke? The revenue generated is 35 million. So option A. Next, William owns the company having revenue of rupees 50 million. So first case and third case again. Then which company is owned by Michelle? In either case, Michelle is owning R. So the answer has to be R. Next, which of the following companies is owned by Luke? Luke either has company S or company P, and both of them are mentioned here. So answer has to be the fourth one, where both these possibilities are entertained. This is an extremely tricky arrangement based question. Hopefully you learned something.